What unfolds when an officer with authority issues encounters a woman who surpasses him in every meaningful aspect? The incident began on a Wednesday evening, well past 11 p.m., the kind of hour when Toledo, Ohio's streets are largely deserted, save for the occasional worker returning from their shift or someone like Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace navigating through the city after concluding a base conference 2 hours south. She traveled in her government-issued black SUV with lightly tinted windows, nothing ostentatious, just neat, straightforward, and understated like herself. Adrienne had been driving for some time, quietly humming along with the rhythm of rubber against asphalt, her thoughts already partially focused on reaching home. She maintained proper speed, stayed in her lane, and drove normally, yet Sergeant Daniel Mercer perceived something different from his position near Reynolds Road. He sat in his typical location, drinking tepid coffee and browsing his phone out of boredom. The shift had been sluggish with no emergencies or incidents, and then an unknown vehicle appeared. He discarded his cup onto the passenger seat and activated his lights. The emergency lights illuminated before Adrienne even noticed the patrol car trailing her. She reduced speed, blinked once, then moved to the roadside calmly and methodically, exactly as her training had taught her. The patrol vehicle's door shut forcefully. Through her side mirror, she observed a tall figure approaching, with one hand already positioned near his weapon, while holding a flashlight in the other. He bypassed the passenger window and went directly to hers. "License and registration," he demanded without any greeting. Adrienne maintained visible hands and lowered her window partway. "Officer, may I inquire about the reason for this stop?" Mercer narrowed his eyes, directing the beam straight into her face. "You were weaving between lanes, failed to signal, appeared possibly intoxicated." She lifted an eyebrow. "I was not." "License and registration," he repeated more forcefully. Adrienne chose not to argue, moving slowly and purposefully as she retrieved her documents from the glove compartment. While handing them over, she mentioned, "This is a government vehicle. I'm a federal employee." Mercer examined the identification and remained silent momentarily. "You military?" "Yes." He displayed a slight sneer. "That doesn't place you above the law." "I never claimed it did." His demeanor became increasingly hostile. "Exit the vehicle for me." Adrienne paused. "Pardon me?" "I said get out of the car. I'm performing a sobriety assessment." Her jaw tightened, but she remained composed. "Based on what grounds? I've cooperated. I haven't consumed alcohol. I'd appreciate an explanation." Mercer moved closer. "Now you're disobeying a legal command." Adrienne remained motionless. "No, I'm requesting clarification." He disliked her response and opened her door himself. "I need you to exit the vehicle immediately." At that moment, she calmly and quietly activated her phone camera and began recording. "Just to be clear," she stated, "this encounter is being recorded." Mercer's gaze shifted to the phone, and momentarily a trace of uncertainty crossed his expression, but he maintained his position. Out of the car. Adrienne emerged with upright posture, not rebellious, simply resolute. She didn't yell or resist, but her bearing, even in civilian attire, conveyed a different narrative. Mercer examined her closely, truly looked, and briefly, a quiet voice in his mind questioned what he was confronting, but his pride spoke louder. He continued with the field sobriety test, having her walk straight under the streetlights as if she were some reckless driver on a weekend night. She performed flawlessly. No slurred speech, no stumbling, no uncertainty. Nevertheless, he issued her a citation for failure to maintain her lane. Adrienne accepted the ticket without comment, just a meaningful glance. She returned to her vehicle and disappeared into the darkness. But Mercer had no concept that the citation would resurface in a courtroom and transform everything. Sergeant Daniel Mercer wasn't inexperienced. 15 years of service had etched deep creases into his face and deeper ones into his self-perception. He'd handled everything from neighborhood confrontations to chaotic traffic incidents and had developed a reputation that made new officers tense when he entered the room. Mercer preferred this dynamic. He didn't pose questions, he issued commands. In his perspective, the badge represented control, authority, and the final word. Whether dealing with a disrespectful teenager or a frustrated driver asking excessive questions, Mercer never retreated and never expressed regret. His West Toledo precinct understood what they possessed. An officer who'd complete paperwork, arrive punctually, and never hesitate. This also meant they recognized he could be harsh, sharp-tongued, and quick to intensify situations, but nobody truly confronted him, not until that evening. Upon returning to the station following the stop, he barely referenced it. He entered the citation into the system, provided a brief report. Failure to maintain lane, possible impairment indicators, no arrest executed, and placed the body camera in the charging station as usual. The recording remained there for 2 days before anyone reviewed it. Meanwhile, Mercer joked about the incident in the break room. "Woman attempted to assert rank on me," he told Officer Diaz. "Displayed her government credentials like that should impress me." Diaz raised his eyebrows. "Wait, she was military." Mercer shrugged. "So she claimed. Some federal employee with an attitude. What was her name?" Mercer reclined in his chair, opened a chip bag, and replied, "Wallace. Adrienne Wallace." Diaz's expression changed. "You mean Lieutenant Colonel Wallace?" Mercer hesitated. "How would you know that?" "She presented at the academy last year," Diaz said slowly. "She's not just military, she's high-ranking, manages logistics from Fort Wayne, Bronze Star, 2 deployments. She's legitimate." Mercer dismissed this with a wave. "I don't care about her status. On the road, I have authority." But something in Diaz's tone persisted, that subtle note of caution and respect that chipped away at Mercer's usual confidence. Still, he didn't review the footage or reconsider the ticket. In his mind, the matter was concluded and forgotten, but it wasn't, because Wallace had submitted a formal complaint the following morning, not only to Internal Affairs but to the Inspector General's office. She wasn't alone. The video she captured had already been shared with her legal team, and a copy was quietly circulating through military command channels. Mercer remained unaware of any of this. He continued his routine, responding to minor calls, being harsh during traffic stops, carrying himself like someone untouchable because for years he had been. The system had shielded him. Supervisors had ignored issues, union representatives had dismissed complaints, and Mercer had grown to believe rules didn't apply to him like they did to others. But now there was someone on the opposing side who wasn't intimidated, someone who didn't shout, fight, or collapse. She simply documented everything, followed procedures, made one phone call at the appropriate time to the proper office, and she had evidence. Mercer didn't anticipate it until the envelope reached his desk marked formal inquiry. Adrienne Wallace wasn't someone who created disturbances without cause. She wasn't theatrical or confrontational, and she certainly didn't have time to pursue every minor injustice she encountered. Not after 22 years in uniform, 2 overseas tours, and enough dangerous situations to make most people surrender. But this situation was different because she wasn't only considering herself. She was thinking about every young soldier she mentored, every civilian she'd witnessed being mistreated, without anyone to advocate for them. Every woman, especially every black woman, who'd been forced to suppress their dignity just to avoid worsening their situation. She wasn't doing that anymore. Back at Fort Wayne, Indiana, Adrienne sat in her office the morning after the stop, staring at her computer screen. She'd barely rested, not because she was furious, though she was, but because the entire incident kept replaying in her mind. How he spoke to her as if she were insignificant, how his hand lingered near his weapon, how he attempted to provoke her into reacting. She understood the pattern, knew what might have occurred if she hadn't maintained her composure, knew precisely how quickly situations could deteriorate even with cameras recording. Her aide, Sergeant Daniels, appeared at her door. "You all right, ma'am?" Adrienne looked up with a calm but determined expression. "No, but I'm addressing it." He entered and closed the door. "I viewed the footage," he said. "Want me to contact the base attorney?" "Already handled," she replied. Daniels paused. "You certain you want to make this public?" Adrienne leaned back. "I'm not seeking headlines. I'm seeking accountability." She meant that. She'd spent her entire career leading with discipline and integrity. Her rank wasn't merely something displayed on her shoulder. It was something earned through years of service, through decisions that affected lives. She'd commanded convoys through dangerous territories, coordinated relief efforts following hurricanes, been responsible for soldiers, supplies, and security across 4 continents. But none of that mattered when she was stopped on a quiet Ohio road. To Mercer, she was just another suspicious driver who didn't respond quickly enough when questioned. What troubled her wasn't only how he treated her, it was how comfortable he seemed doing it. That was the real issue. So Adrienne made several calls, first to JAG, then to the Inspector General's office. She attached the footage and filed the complaint. She didn't exaggerate or dramatize. She simply told the truth, supported by video evidence, and let the facts speak for themselves. By week's end, the story had begun circulating within military legal circles. It hadn't reached the media yet, but Mercer's name was now connected to an internal investigation. The department's legal counsel had been notified, and Adrienne continued working and appearing as usual, not mentioning it unless asked. Behind the scenes, she was preparing something else because her attorney had suggested the stop wasn't just inappropriate. It might have violated federal policy given her government status in the absence of probable cause. If necessary, they'd go to court. Adrienne didn't hesitate at that prospect. She welcomed it, but Mercer still didn't believe this would progress anywhere, not until he was ordered to appear before a judge. The envelope was thin, nothing elaborate, just a plain manila folder with his name typed on front and a return address from Lucas County Civil Court. Mercer tore it open in the parking lot, half distracted, assuming it was another traffic summons or departmental memo. But it wasn't. It was an appearance notice. A formal civil rights complaint had been filed. The plaintiff, Lieutenant Colonel Adrienne Wallace. The charges: violation of constitutional rights during a traffic stop, including unlawful detainment, intimidation, and abuse of authority. Mercer stood there momentarily, staring at the document, then laughed aloud. "No way," he muttered. "No way this succeeds." But when he returned inside the station, the atmosphere was different. His captain, Officer Redding, summoned him into the office. Door closed, blinds drawn. "Dan," Redding began, "we need to discuss this." Mercer sat with arms crossed. "About what? The lady from the other night? She's trying to play victim." Redding didn't smile. "She's not playing anything. Do you even know who she is?" "I don't care who she is. She got pulled over, acted arrogant, and now she's angry I didn't treat her special." Redding leaned forward. "She's not just some random motorist. She's a lieutenant colonel, a combat veteran. Her record's pristine, her connections run deep, and she has the entire incident recorded from two perspectives, yours and hers." Mercer scoffed. "So what? We just surrender and apologize because she has some stripes." "No, but we don't pretend this is insignificant either. You're going to court, and when this becomes public, and it will, it's going to explode." Still, Mercer couldn't abandon his arrogance. "She didn't even get arrested. I didn't touch her. I followed procedure." "You were on edge, Dan. You escalated. You treated her like a suspect before you even knew her identity." Mercer bit his lip. For once, he lacked a quick comeback. The notice indicated the court date was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Meanwhile, word had spread throughout the department, whispers in the locker room, sideways glances in hallways. Nobody spoke to his face, but Mercer could sense the shift. He was no longer the predator. He was wounded, and others could detect it. Back at her base, Adrienne prepared differently. She didn't hold press conferences or demand attention. She met quietly with her legal team, reviewed every second of footage, and outlined her experience in precise detail. She was calm, collected, but relentless. Her lawyer, Delaney Price, sat across from her and asked, "You sure you want to do this in court? It's public. It'll follow you." Adrienne nodded. "Good. Let it." Price paused. Most people would have let it go. "I've let too much go already," Adrienne said. "This isn't just about me." She wasn't seeking financial compensation. She wanted a public record, a moment that could be referenced, something demonstrating that power didn't excuse behavior and that silence wasn't the only option. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for every person who'd been spoken down to, dismissed, or bullied behind flashing lights and a badge. When the court date finally arrived, she didn't enter quietly. She walked in wearing her full service uniform. Badges, medals, the rank on her chest clear as daylight. She wanted the jury to see her not just as a woman in a car that night, but as a human being who had served her country, respected the law, and expected the same in return. Mercer was already seated when she entered. He turned, saw the uniform, and his smirk wavered for the first time. But the real test hadn't begun yet, because when Wallace took the stand, the entire courtroom leaned forward. The courtroom was filled, not with reporters yet, but with officers from both the local precinct and Fort Wayne military base. Adrienne's colleagues came in silent and respectful, dressed in uniform or business attire, seated alongside civilians who had no idea what this case truly represented. To some, it appeared to be a traffic stop gone wrong, but to Adrienne, it was the culmination of something deeper, something that had been building for years. Mercer sat at the defense table, rigid in his suit, face expressionless but tense. His attorney, Charles Brenner, leaned in and whispered something to him. Mercer didn't react. He just kept his eyes on the judge. Then Adrienne was called. She stood, adjusted her collar, and walked to the witness stand with the same quiet discipline she'd used leading convoys through dangerous areas. She didn't hurry or falter. Every eye in the room focused on her. Her ribbons reflected the light. Her posture commanded respect, not because of her appearance, but because of who she was. The judge cleared his throat. "Colonel Wallace, thank you for your service. You may proceed." Delaney Price stepped forward without missing a beat. "Lieutenant Colonel, could you describe the night of January 17th? Adrienne spoke plainly. "I was returning from a meeting at the Indiana Guard Reserve around 11:15. I was pulled over by Officer Mercer. There was no erratic driving, no signs of intoxication. I was compliant. I asked reasonable questions. He responded with aggression." She kept her voice steady, no edge, just truth. "He demanded I exit the vehicle without explanation. When I asked why, he repeated the demand louder. At that point, I activated my phone to record the remainder of the stop. Delaney nodded. Did you ever refuse a lawful order? No. Did you resist in any way? No. Did you identify yourself? Yes. I informed him I was a federal employee and that I was driving a government vehicle. The courtroom remained silent. No coughing, no rustling, just her voice and the soft scratching of pens on paper. Then came the playback. First, Adrian's phone footage, steady, clear, damning. Then the body cam. It showed everything. Mercer's tone, his posture, his hand hovering near his weapon, even when she was fully cooperative, the unnecessary field test, the dismissive attitude when she passed it. The jury didn't speak. They didn't need to. You could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Then came cross-examination. Brenner approached the stand with that careful tone lawyers use when trying to appear respectful while digging deep. Lieutenant Colonel Wallace, with all due respect, is it possible that Officer Mercer was simply following protocol? Adrian didn't blink. No. Is it possible he was concerned for your safety or the safety of others? I was driving within the lines. I was sober. I was not aggressive. There was no safety concern. And yet you recorded the stop. Why? Because I've lived long enough to know that silence isn't protection. I wanted an accurate record of what happened. Brenner nodded slowly. So you don't believe officers should have discretion during stops? Adrian looked at him and said calmly, I believe discretion must be paired with discipline. That badge isn't a free pass, it's a responsibility. That line hit. Even the judge paused before asking the next question. Then it was Mercer's turn. He walked up to the stand, not to testify, but to watch as the footage played again, this time frame by frame. Every pause, every clipped response, every time he looked at her like she wasn't human. The prosecutor leaned in. Sergeant Mercer, why did you ask her to exit the vehicle? Mercer stiffened. She looked evasive. Did she disobey any of your commands? She questioned me. Is that illegal? Mercer hesitated. No. Did she raise her voice? Make threats? No. So what made you escalate the stop? No answer. Sergeant Mercer, were you aware she was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army? Not at the time. And if you had known, Mercer's voice dropped. I probably would have handled it differently. The room went quiet again. There it was, the truth, or at least part of it. Not regret, just a slip of honesty. Mercer didn't see a person that night. He saw someone who didn't move fast enough, didn't speak the way he liked, didn't submit. And now, sitting across from her, with her rank laid bare, the courtroom could see it too. But the trial wasn't over because now the jury had to decide what accountability really looks like. 3 days passed before the verdict came in. The courthouse was quieter this time. No military uniforms, no off-duty officers watching from the back. Just Adrienne, her lawyer, and a few civilians who had followed the case out of curiosity. Mercer sat with his attorney, hands clasped, trying to hold the same blank expression he'd worn through the entire trial. But this time, his jaw moved slightly, like he was grinding his teeth without realizing it. Judge Cynthia Morales shuffled the papers on her bench and looked out across the courtroom. In the matter of Wallace versus Mercer, she began, the jury has found in favor of the plaintiff. Mercer shifted. Adrienne stayed still. The court recognizes a violation of constitutional rights during an unlawful stop and detainment. Furthermore, the court finds that the actions taken by Sergeant Mercer were not aligned with department policy or basic expectations of professional conduct. No one clapped. No gasps. Just the flat weight of consequence. Mercer's attorney leaned in and whispered, "We'll appeal," but even he didn't sound sure. The judge continued, "While no criminal charges will be filed at this time, the plaintiff is entitled to damages totaling $35,000. This decision will remain on permanent public record. Furthermore, this ruling will be forwarded to the Department of Justice and the Toledo Police Department for internal review and policy evaluation." Adrienne didn't smile. She didn't pump her fist or celebrate. She just nodded once, not to the judge, not to the jury, but to herself. She had accomplished what she came to do. After the hearing, Mercer stood outside the courthouse, pacing near the bottom steps. Reporters had started to arrive, not in large numbers, just a few local outlets, but enough for him to look down and cover his face with a folder as cameras clicked. He didn't speak, didn't make a statement. He just walked to his car and drove away. Inside, Adrienne stopped in the hallway, pulled out her phone, and read the notification. "Verdict in your favor. Case closed." Her attorney caught up to her. "You could have asked for more." Adrienne shook her head. It was never about the money. Delaney looked at her for a second. "You think it'll change anything?" Adrienne turned toward the glass doors and said, "I don't know. But maybe next time he pulls someone over, he'll think twice." A week later, Mercer was placed on administrative leave while an internal review was conducted. Rumors said he might be reassigned. Others said this was the beginning of the end for his career. Either way, the shield that had once protected him was cracked, and everyone could see it. At Fort Wayne, Adrienne returned to her duties as if nothing had happened. She wasn't interested in being a hero. She didn't want interviews. She had work to do, people to train, missions to manage, responsibilities to uphold. But within her command, the message was clear. You don't always have to raise your voice to demand respect. You don't always have to break to prove you've been wronged. And sometimes the quietest stance speaks the loudest. But even with the verdict behind her, Adrienne knew the fight wasn't over, because accountability isn't just about punishment, it's about what comes next. 2 months later, Adrienne stood in front of a room filled with young recruits at Fort Wayne. Most of them had only been in uniform a few weeks, fresh faces, open minds, eager to serve. She wasn't there to talk about combat strategy or logistics this time. She was there to talk about leadership and what it means when no one's watching. She looked around the room and asked a simple question. How many of you think a uniform automatically earns you respect? A few hands went up, some half-hearted, some confident. She nodded. I understand why you'd think that, but here's the truth. Respect isn't something you're owed. It's something you prove every day, every choice. She let the silence hang for a second. Same goes for power, she continued. The badge, the rank, the authority, it's not a shield, it's a weight. And if you can't carry it with discipline, you don't deserve to carry it at all. In the back, one of the newer soldiers leaned forward, eyes locked. Adrienne paused, then added, When I was stopped by an officer who forgot that truth, I could have yelled. I could have panicked. I could have let it slide. She looked around. I didn't do any of those things. I documented it. I filed. I showed up in court, and I told the truth. A long pause. That officer thought his badge made him untouchable, until he saw my rank, not just on my uniform, but in how I carried myself. That's the difference. That's leadership. The room stayed quiet, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from disinterest. It was the kind that comes when something lands. Adrienne closed the folder in front of her and looked up. Lead with character, serve with integrity, and never forget, you don't just represent the uniform, you represent every person who came before you and everyone who will come after. She stepped off the platform, not for applause, not for thanks, but because the work was already done. Let this story be a reminder. Authority without accountability is just a mask for weakness. Speak up, stand firm, and when you see wrong, don't turn away, because silence is comfort for the guilty, but courage is protection for the rest of us.